On the day Emily Carter buried her mother, her husband handed her divorce papers beside the open grave. Pregnant and heartbroken, she watched Ryan Walker walk away with the woman he'd been secretly cheating with. What he didn't know was that Emily was about to inherit a hidden fortune that would shift the entire power dynamic. And the man who thought he had destroyed her was about to witness her rise. Emily Carter never imagined her life could collapse in a single afternoon, yet there she stood under the pale Texas sky, watching workers lower her mother's casket into the ground as the weight of grief pressed against her ribs. The air felt heavy enough to choke on, thick with the scent of cut grass and wilting lilies, the kind her mother used to place on the kitchen table every Sunday morning. Emily kept one hand on her swollen belly, as if anchoring herself to the last steady thing she had left in the world. Her mother, Evelyn Carter, had been the only person who never failed her, not once, not ever, and now Emily felt like she was standing at the edge of a life she no longer recognized, a life missing its foundation, its compass, its softness. She tried to focus on the pastor's words, something about love, loss, and eternal peace. But everything blurred together into background noise while her heart beat loud enough to drown out every attempt to stay composed. She didn't care that mascara streaked down her cheeks or that her hands trembled as she clutched the fragile funeral program. None of that mattered. What mattered was that her mother was gone, and without her, the world already felt colder. Ryan Walker, her husband of 2 years, stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed each time the breeze shifted, yet he felt impossibly distant. Emily had hoped, prayed that in her darkest moment, his presence would be a source of strength, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone. Instead, his posture was stiff, his jaw tight, his eyes drifting toward everything except the casket being lowered between them. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't whisper a comforting word, didn't offer even the smallest gesture of support. Emily told herself he was grieving in his own way, processing the moment differently, but deep down she knew something had been wrong for months. The late-night messages he hid from her, the sudden change in his routine, the excuses that never sounded convincing, she had tried to ignore them, forcing trust into places where doubt had already taken root. Still, she never imagined the truth would hit her here now, at the exact moment she needed him most. As she turned slightly to look at him, searching his face for some sign of love, for any trace of the man she married, Ryan slipped a hand into his jacket pocket. It wasn't a casual gesture. It was deliberate, tense, calculated, and immediately dread pooled in her stomach, cold and heavy. When Ryan pulled out the manila envelope, Emily's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, confused, thinking maybe it was paperwork related to the service, some small logistical detail the funeral home had overlooked. But the envelope looked too official, too out of place among flowers and mourning clothes. Her mind tried to reject what her instincts already knew. Ryan turned toward her, finally meeting her gaze, and Emily's heart cracked at the emptiness she found in his eyes. There was no warmth, no sympathy, not even remorse, just hardened resolve. "Emily," he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the pastor's prayer as if the world around them didn't exist. He held out the envelope. "Sign this." She stared, numb, the words barely registering. What is it?" Her voice was fragile, shaky, the kind of voice a person used when they already knew the answer but desperately hoped to be wrong. Ryan didn't soften, he didn't hesitate. "Divorce papers," he said. "I've already signed. I need you to do the same." The ground felt like it tilted beneath her. "Divorce, here. Now." Her pulse hammered as she took the envelope with trembling fingers. Her entire body felt hot and cold at once, a rush of disbelief cooling instantly into humiliation. "Ryan," she whispered, barely able to form the words, "my mother is being buried. I'm carrying your child." She waited for him to realize the cruelty of his timing, waited for him to take it back, to apologize, to explain anything that didn't end with her signing away her marriage next to a fresh grave. Instead, he straightened his tie like he was preparing for a business meeting. "It's better this way," he said, eyes avoiding hers, voice clinical and detached. "There's no point dragging it out. I'm with Brianna now. She needs me." Emily felt her knees weaken, her vision blur. Brianna Stone, the coworker she once confronted Ryan about. The woman he insisted was just a friend. The woman whose name had been popping up on his phone at midnight. The woman he was now leaving his pregnant wife for. Emily gasped, not from physical pain, but from a heartbreak so sharp it felt like being stabbed from the inside. "She's pregnant," Ryan added, the words cold enough to frost over her skin. "I'm going to be a father. She deserves my attention." His voice carried not even a hint of irony, not even the faintest recognition that Emily, standing in front of him, holding his child, already fit that description. Murmurs rippled through the gathered mourners as heads began turning, eyes widening, whispers growing. Emily hated that she could feel their stares locking onto her like spotlights, dissecting her shock, her grief, her shame. She could almost hear their thoughts. What did she do wrong? Why would he leave her like this? The humiliation clung to her like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Then she saw them, Ryan's parents. Linda and Richard Walker stood beneath a small tent canopy, arms crossed, observing the scene with unsettling satisfaction. They weren't grieving with her, they weren't surprised, they weren't even bothered by the spectacle. They had planned this. Emily realized it instantly. They had chosen this moment, this vulnerable, devastating moment, to sever her from their family. To them, she wasn't a daughter-in-law, she was a burden to be discarded. Temporary placeholder for the better option they approved of. Emily looked at the divorce papers again, her vision swimming. Her mother's name was still fresh on the tombstone behind her, not even covered by earth yet. And here she was being abandoned like she meant nothing. Her heart pounded with disbelief, betrayal, and a rising fury she wasn't emotionally prepared to feel. She looked back at Ryan, searching for even a flicker of humanity, but all she found was impatience. "Emily," he said sharply, "please. Just sign it." He spoke as if she were inconveniencing him, as if her heartbreak were unreasonable, as if the timing weren't monstrous. Something inside her cracked, not a clean break, but a deep fracture that promised she would never be the same woman after today. She exhaled shakily, steeling herself, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. She didn't sign, not yet, but she held the papers tightly as a reminder that everything familiar was gone. Ryan exhaled with frustration when she didn't immediately obey. "I'm choosing my happiness," he said flatly. "You should try it sometime." Then he walked away just like that. No apology, no hesitation, no acknowledgement of the wife he abandoned or the child he created. He simply returned to Brianna, who stood waiting nearby with rehearsed concern on her face, and to his parents, who greeted him with smug approval. Emily stood alone as the workers began finishing the burial, her world collapsing while everyone else carried on as though nothing significant had happened. She didn't move. She couldn't move. She just stared at her mother's grave, tears falling onto the envelope in her hands. The life she thought she had, the future she believed in, vanished in minutes. She whispered to her mother, voice breaking, "How could he do this today of all days?" And although no answer came, something in her heart hardened, a small spark of resolve forming beneath the wreckage. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this cruel betrayal, would be the beginning of a transformation Ryan would never see coming. Ryan Walker had always been good at rewriting reality in a way that suited him. But standing there at the cemetery with the divorce papers still hanging between them, he perfected the performance of pretending that Emily's devastation was nothing more than an unfortunate necessity. When he spoke the name Brianna, it hit Emily harder than the Texas heat soaking through her black dress. The name sliced through the fog of grief, snapping her into a painful clarity. Brianna Stone, his coworker, the woman Emily had once asked him about with an uneasy feeling she couldn't quite explain. Ryan had laughed at her concern, brushed it off as hormones and stress, and insisted that Brianna was just a colleague he sometimes helped with projects. Now, in front of her mother's grave, he was admitting not only that they were together, but that Brianna was carrying his child. Emily felt as though the sun had dropped out of the sky. Her chest tightened, not from heartbreak alone, but from betrayal so sharp it left her breathless. It wasn't just that he'd cheated. It wasn't even that he'd chosen another woman. It was the timing, the cruelty of revealing all of this while her mother was being lowered into the earth. As her vision blurred, Emily tried to steady herself, pressing her hand more firmly against her belly, as if protecting the life inside her could somehow protect her from the unraveling of her own world. She stared at Ryan, hoping for some sign that he understood the magnitude of what he'd done. But instead of guilt, she saw irritation, as if Emily's emotional collapse were an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe he had created. "It's complicated," Ryan said, rubbing the back of his neck in a way she recognized as his nervous gesture she had once found endearing when she believed it meant he cared too much. Now it felt like a mockery. "Complicated," Emily repeated, hardly recognizing her own voice. "You were leaving your pregnant wife for another pregnant woman, and you call that complicated?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably, but not because of remorse. He looked restless, annoyed, like he wanted the conversation to be over. Emily watched his expression harden, turning him into a version of himself she had never seen before. "Brianna makes me happy," he said finally, the words dropping like stones. "She makes me feel alive. You make me feel trapped." Trapped. That word burrowed into Emily's chest and lodged there like shrapnel. She couldn't believe he'd said it, not after everything she'd given up for their marriage. Not after sticking with him through long nights at work, financial stress, fertility scares, and the emotional toll of caring for her mother during her illness. Trapped was the last thing she thought she made him feel. But hearing him say it so bluntly, so unapologetically, made her realize he had probably rehearsed those words. Maybe even use them with Brianna to justify his betrayal. Emily's hands shook, but she refused to cry in front of him again. She swallowed hard, fighting for composure, refusing to give him the satisfaction of watching her fall apart twice in one day. She managed to say, "You have no idea what you're redoing." It was the only truth she had left, the only thing she could cling to in the middle of the chaos he had unleashed. Ryan gave a humorless laugh. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm choosing my happiness." The coldness in his tone made Emily's stomach twist. That kind of selfishness didn't appear overnight. He must have been feeding it, nurturing it, justifying it for months until it grew into the delusion he now stood behind. Emily opened her mouth to speak again, to beg him to at least reconsider the timing if nothing else. But the words froze when she saw movement behind him. Brianna was approaching, her perfectly styled hair catching the sunlight, her expression a blend of practiced sympathy and smug triumph. Her posture was soft, her steps slow, as if she were trying to embody the image of a supportive partner. But the glint in her eyes gave her away. She wasn't there to comfort Emily. She was there to claim the victory she had orchestrated from the shadows. Emily remembered the mentorship programs she and her mother used to volunteer for, where they taught young girls how to identify manipulators. Standing across from Brianna, she felt like she was looking at a case study in real time. Every detail was calculated, from the hand she placed over her stomach to the soft tilt of her head. But Emily saw the truth Brianna wasn't showing. She wasn't glowing. She was even uneasy, the way pregnant women often were. Something about her demeanor looked manufactured, like she was performing a role rather than living a reality. But Emily dismissed the thought almost immediately. She was too overwhelmed, too hurt, too consumed by the betrayal to trust her instincts. She told herself she was just imagining things, desperate to find a flaw in the narrative Ryan had chosen over her. Brianna stopped a few steps away, her voice sweet in a way that grated on Emily's nerves. "Ryan, babe, the car is getting hot. We should go soon." Babe, the casual intimacy of it made Emily's stomach lurch. Brianna looked at her, pretending to be sympathetic. "I'm really sorry this is happening today. None of us wanted it to be like this." Emily stared at her, speechless at the audacity. None of us, as if Brianna hadn't been waiting for this exact moment. As if she hadn't spent months planting seeds, whispering doubts, crafting lies that Emily had been too trusting to question. Emily wanted to scream, to shout the truth, to call her out on everything, but what good would it do? Ryan had already chosen his side. And right now he was acting like Brianna's presence at his wife's grief-stricken moment was normal, acceptable, even justified. That betrayal stung almost as much as the divorce itself. While Emily struggled to breathe, Ryan reached for Brianna's waist, guiding her protectively. Possessively, the way he used to guide Emily during the early months of her pregnancy, when he still pretended to care. Watching him touch Brianna like that made something inside Emily crumble. It wasn't jealousy. It was the realization that the man she married no longer existed. Or maybe he never had. Maybe she had fallen in love with a version of him she invented to survive the early signs she ignored. As Ryan turned away, ready to leave her standing among the tombstones and pitying eyes of strangers, Emily felt her world tilt again. Her mother was gone, her marriage was gone, the future she imagined was gone. But beneath the heartbreak, beneath the humiliation, beneath the grief that threatened to swallow her whole, something new flickered inside her. Anger. Not the kind that demands destruction, but the kind that fuels survival. The kind her mother always talked about, the steady, grounded strength that appears only when you have hit the absolute bottom. Emily had never felt it before, but she felt it now. It vibrated under her skin, subtle but undeniable. As Ryan and Brianna walked away, Emily wrapped her arms around herself, not for comfort, but for stability. She whispered under her breath, "You'll regret this," not as a threat, not even as hope, but as a statement of truth. Because the universe had a way of rebalancing itself, and Ryan had no idea what truths were waiting for him just beyond the horizon. Emily didn't know the details yet, but she could feel that something was shifting. Something her mother might have prepared her for. Something that would take betrayal and transform it into power. Something that would change everything. And as the cemetery emptied and Emily stood alone beside the fresh mound of earth, she realized this wasn't an ending at all. It was the first crack of a beginning Ryan Walker would never see coming. Linda Walker had always been a woman who liked to orchestrate outcomes from the shadows. But as Emily lifted her eyes and saw Ryan's parents standing under the shade of a large oak tree with their arms crossed and expressions of smug satisfaction, she finally understood the full extent of their involvement. It wasn't an accident that they were here. It wasn't coincidence that Ryan chose this exact moment to deliver the blow. No, this scene had been choreographed, rehearsed, and timed with a cruelty so precise it felt surgical. Linda stood with her husband Richard and their daughter Madison, all three dressed impeccably in black, but nothing about their posture suggested grief. They weren't mourning the loss of Emily's mother. They weren't hurting for Emily, whose life was being upended a few yards away. Instead, they watched with a cold curiosity, as if they were waiting for Emily to crack, to break down, to give them the reaction that would validate their own narrative about her being too emotional, too unstable, too wrong for their son. Emily felt as though the ground beneath her were shifting again. This time with the realization that everything she had endured in her marriage wasn't just the result of Ryan's weakness, but part of a larger influence she had underestimated. While she stood alone with grief tearing at her ribs, Ryan's family looked like spectators at a performance they had tickets for. And in their eyes, Emily wasn't the daughter-in-law, so she was the problem that needed to be discarded. Linda had always been polite in a way that felt performative. She smiled with her lips but never her eyes, complimented Emily's choices with a tone that suggested criticism disguised as courtesy, and routinely offered advice that sounded helpful but carried an undercurrent of condescension. Emily remembered countless dinners where Linda corrected the way she cut her steak, commented on how she spoke, or insisted she take better care of herself for Ryan's sake. At the time, Emily tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, chalking it up to generational differences or the normal tension between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. But standing in that cemetery, the truth hit her with a force that made her stomach twist. Linda had never accepted her. To Linda, Emily wasn't part of the family, she was an obstacle. And now, watching her son betray his pregnant wife at a funeral, she looked pleased, almost energized, as though her long-awaited plan was finally unfolding exactly as she intended. Richard, usually quieter and more expressionless, kept his arms folded tightly across his chest, but Emily noticed the faint upward curve at the corner of his mouth. Even Madison, who had once pretended to like Emily for the sake of appearances, wore an expression that hovered between satisfaction and relief, as if they had collectively removed a stain from their polished family image. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't just a husband betraying his wife. This was an entire family collaborating in her downfall. She replayed the past 2 years in her mind, noticing patterns she had brushed aside. The prenup Linda insisted they sign under the guise of protecting both families. The sudden pressure Ryan felt to find someone more aligned with their future. The subtle comments Madison made about Brianna being such a sweetheart at the company holiday party. Even the way Ryan's parents had stopped inviting Emily to family events over the last few months, giving vague excuses like scheduling conflicts or wanting quality time alone. And now, here they were, watching the destruction of Emily's life like it was an unfortunate yet justified business decision. Emily's grip tightened on the envelope. Her heart thudded painfully as she realized that while she had been caring for her dying mother, Ryan's family had been strategizing her removal. Every missed call from Madison suddenly felt suspicious. Every formal smile from Linda looked like a mask. Every awkward silence at family dinners back when Emily still attended seemed loaded with unspoken judgment. It was all falling into place, piece by piece, forming a picture far more cruel than she had ever imagined. If this had happened anywhere else, it would have been monstrous. But here, at Evelyn Carter's funeral, it felt inhuman. Emily watched as Linda leaned toward Richard and whispered something into his ear, her lips curling into a smug half-smile. Richard nodded slowly, his gaze locked onto Emily as if analyzing a chess piece they had just removed from the board. Madison was tapping her phone, no doubt updating Brianna or a friend about how the situation was unfolding. The fact that they treated her heartbreak like a planned event, a milestone, even made Emily's stomach twist. She had never been a daughter-in-law to them. She had been a placeholder, a temporary inconvenience. Watching them now, it was painfully clear that the Walkers believed they had outmaneuvered her, that they were at the finish line of a battle she didn't even know she had been fighting. But they were wrong. They had no idea what Evelyn Carter had left behind. No idea that the woman they dismissed as a small-town widow had built something so vast, so meticulously protected, so intentionally hidden, that their attempt to erase Emily would soon turn into the biggest mistake they'd ever made. Still, in that moment, Emily didn't feel powerful. She felt broken. Her legs trembled, her vision blurred with tears, and her throat burned from holding back, every emotion threatening to spill out. She wasn't ready to fight, not yet. All she could do was stand there while her grief merged with humiliation, betrayal, and a growing clarity about the people surrounding her. She saw Brianna walk toward the Walkers, greeting them with warm familiarity that confirmed everything Emily feared. They had embraced her long before the truth came out. Linda touched Brianna's arm affectionately, almost proudly, as though she were welcoming the daughter-in-law she always wanted. Emily felt a wave of nausea crash over her as she realized this wasn't a sudden switch, it was a replacement planned months in advance. She could see it now in the glances shared between them. Brianna wasn't new. She had been integrated into their circle long before today, which meant Emily had been pushed out long before today. Ryan had just delivered the final blow, and the Walkers had been waiting for it. Emily's heart pounded harder with every passing second. She wasn't just being abandoned, she was being erased. Her history with Ryan, no matter how imperfect, was being discarded like it had no value. The child she carried, the sacrifices she made, the promises they once shared, all reduced to collateral damage in the Walkers' pursuit of a better fit for their son. Emily's mind drifted back to her mother, her constant source of warmth, her anchor. Evelyn would have never allowed anyone to treat her daughter this way. If she were alive, she would have stood between Emily and the Walkers like a shield. But now, all Emily had was the memory of her mother's strength, a strength she desperately needed to borrow as she stood in the middle of a war she had never prepared for. Yet even in her despair, Emily felt something solidify inside her, a promise, a resolve, a defiance that hadn't been there an hour earlier. They believed they had defeated her. They believed they had calculated everything. They believed Emily was alone. They had no idea that Evelyn Carter, a woman they had dismissed as insignificant, had left her daughter the one thing that could burn their entire scheme to the ground. And when the time came, Emily would make sure every one of them understood exactly what they had underestimated. Not with screaming, not with vengeance fueled by chaos, but with precision, with control, with the kind of justice her mother would have admired. For now, she simply breathed, gathering every shard of composure she had left. She would let them walk away believing they had won. The Walkers turned from her with satisfied expressions, their attention already shifting to Brianna as if Emily were no longer relevant. And Emily, standing beside the fresh earth covering her mother, realized that this moment, this brutal, calculated moment, was not the end. It was the beginning. The Walkers just didn't know it yet. The days after the funeral unfolded like a slow, crushing wave that refused to recede. Emily returned to the small home she once shared with Ryan, a place that used to hum with the warmth of evening conversations, shared meals, and soft laughter, but now felt like a tomb holding the remains of a life she no longer recognized. The walls felt too close, every corner haunted by memories that stabbed rather than comforted. The couch where she and Ryan once debated baby names felt like an artifact from a life she'd hallucinated. The kitchen where he used to kiss her forehead while she stirred pasta sauce now seemed foreign and staged, like she had stepped into someone else's home. Even the framed ultrasound photo on the fridge, which once made her smile every morning, now tore at her heart with a grief that felt almost physical. She walked through the room slowly, as though moving too quickly might shatter the fragile shell holding her together. Every step reminded her that the person who should have been beside her during the worst moment of her life had chosen to abandon her instead, and not just abandon her, humiliate her publicly, strategically, mercilessly. The house felt colder than it ever had, though the Texas summer heat still clung to the air. Even the soft hum of the IC unit sounded like a reminder that she was alone now, left to sit with a grief no one seemed to care about. The first shock came only a day after the funeral, when Emily stepped outside to check the mailbox. A couple from down the street, people she'd spoken to dozens of times. People who had congratulated her when they found out she was pregnant, saw her and abruptly turned to walk the other way. She watched them pretend to be deeply invested in a conversation that had clearly begun the moment they spotted her. At first, she told herself she was imagining it. People avoided eye contact all the time. But then it happened again with a different neighbor, and again with another. By the third interaction, the message was impossible to miss. They weren't avoiding her because they didn't know what to say. They were avoiding her because they didn't want to be involved. Emily had never been the subject of judgmental speculation before, but she felt it now, heavy and suffocating, pressing against her from every direction. Eyes watching from curtain cracks, whispered conversations that abruptly stopped when she walked by, pitying glances masked with poorly acted concern. She didn't need to hear the exact words to know the narrative taking shape. People always needed a neat explanation when a marriage exploded, and the explanation was rarely flattering for the woman left behind. Someone must have asked, why would Ryan leave her at a funeral, no less unless something had been terribly wrong. Others must have assumed Emily had driven him away, that the pregnancy wasn't enough to keep him, that she'd been difficult or emotional or weak. Rumors didn't need truth to spread, they only needed a spark of speculation, and Ryan had conveniently provided more than enough fuel with his dramatic public exit. Her phone didn't stop buzzing for 2 days, not with support or love, but with messages that stung more than the grief itself. People she once trusted reached out, but their words weren't comforting, they were invasive, patronizing, probing. "I heard what happened," one message read, But I also heard you two had problems long before this. Is it true? Another asked, did you know about Brianna? I mean, be honest. The worst were the ones that pretended to care but were clearly fishing for gossip. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I just think it's important to understand both sides, as if betrayal had sides, as if humiliation could be balanced on a scale, as if Ryan presenting divorce papers at her mother's funeral had been a mutual miscommunication. Emily tried to ignore them, but her heart clenched each time a new message appeared. Each one confirming that people weren't reaching out to support her, they were reaching out to speculate, to judge, dissect her grief for entertainment. Friends she once considered close began to pull away. The group chats she used to be part of suddenly stopped including her. Invitations she used to get for brunch or walks in the park dried up. She saw pictures, online gatherings, dinners, celebrations that she would have been invited to only weeks ago. The captions always carried something painfully ironic, words like supportive friends and girls who stick together. A hypocrisy that would have made her laugh if she weren't drowning in sorrow. It didn't take long for Emily to understand that people didn't reject her because of what she had done. They rejected her because they were afraid of being caught in the mess. Society didn't know how to handle a woman who had been publicly discarded. A woman who was pregnant, grieving, and abandoned was too heavy, too inconvenient, too messy for the curated image people liked to present. Better to distance themselves, pretend it wasn't happening, and wait for the drama to blow over. Emily wasn't a friend to them now, she was a cautionary tale. Even her coworkers from the nonprofit she volunteered at reached out only to ask logistical questions about her upcoming maternity leave. Avoid any acknowledgement of her situation. One message read, let us know when you're emotionally ready to return. We don't want to put pressure on you. It was dressed up as concern, but the subtext was obvious. Her personal catastrophe made them uncomfortable, and they preferred to keep their distance until she returned to a version of herself that was easier for them to handle. Emily found herself wondering how many of these people had believed Ryan's narrative even before the divorce papers appeared. Ryan, the charming, well-dressed financial analyst with an easy smile, had always been able to manipulate public perception. She remembered the cryptic quotes he posted on social media for months leading up to the divorce statements about choosing happiness, knowing when to walk away, and finally prioritizing myself. At the time, Emily thought he was going through a phase. Now she realized he had been laying the groundwork, preparing the world for the moment he publicly abandoned her. Meanwhile, Brianna had been playing her own role with strategic efficiency. Her social media was full of vague posts about new beginnings, unexpected blessings, and the beauty of timing. Nothing too direct, nothing that revealed the truth. But everything pointed toward a narrative that made her look like the victim of a complicated love story, not the architect of Emily's humiliation. When Emily saw the comments filled with congratulations, emojis, and praises, her heart curled in on itself. No one asked about the other woman. No one ever did. People loved a beautiful lie far more than an uncomfortable truth. As the days passed, the isolation grew thicker. Emily found herself drifting through the house like a ghost tethered to grief, going from room to room without purpose, exhausted not from pregnancy but from the crushing awareness that she had become a spectacle. Even the grocery store felt hostile. She could feel people staring too long, too curiously, as if trying to piece together why a pregnant woman was buying groceries alone. Red-eyed and wearing an oversized hoodie, a cashier she had seen for months gave her a hesitant smile. The kind people give when they recognize you but aren't sure if acknowledging your pain will make things worse. Emily wanted to disappear, to crawl into her mother's now empty study and never come out. She spent hours there, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and faint traces of Evelyn's perfume. It was the only place that still safe, untouched by judgment or betrayal. The world outside had turned into a stage where she had no script, no costume, no armor. She tried calling her mother's best friend once, hoping for comfort, but even that conversation left her hollow. The woman's voice was soft but loaded with pity that made Emily feel small, broken, defeated. She hung up quickly, unable to stomach another person treating her like she was fragile glass instead of someone fighting to stay afloat. Every night, Emily lay awake, one hand on her belly as if grounding herself in the one part of her life that hadn't betrayed her. She whispered to her unborn daughter, promising that things would get better even though she didn't believe it herself. But something inside her was shifting. The more the world pushed her into isolation, the more she felt something steady forming beneath the heartbreak, a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. It didn't roar, it didn't scream, it didn't demand attention, but it was there, growing with every day she survived. The loneliness wasn't breaking her, it was shaping her, preparing her. The people who whispered behind her back, the neighbors who turned away, The friends who disappeared, they were paving the way for a transformation none of them would expect. And somewhere deep inside, Emily felt the first flicker of a truth her mother had always believed: adversity wasn't the end of a person. It was the beginning of who they would become. Emily Carter wasn't done, not even close. Her world had collapsed, but she wasn't buried beneath it. She was crawling out of the wreckage, piece by piece. And soon everyone who had turned away from her would learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate someone who had nothing left to lose. The 5th day after the funeral began like the others, heavy, disorienting, and soaked in the kind of exhaustion that seeped into Emily's bones. She had barely slept, drifting in and out of restless dreams that tangled grief with betrayal, waking repeatedly the dull ache of knowing her mother was gone and her marriage had imploded. The house felt stale, as though the air itself were growing tired of witnessing her pain. Emily wandered through the living room in an oversized t-shirt, barefoot, her hair tied in a loose, neglected knot. The heaviness in her chest made it difficult to breathe, but she forced herself to move, to do anything other than sit and drown in the wreckage of her life. Today, she told herself, she would try to organize her mother's things, the few boxes Evelyn had left at her house before her health declined. It wasn't bravery, it wasn't strength. It was a desperate attempt to feel close to her mother again, to tether herself to something that didn't hurt to remember. Her mother's study was the smallest room in the house, tucked away at the back where the afternoon light usually spilled through the windows in warm streaks. Today, the room felt dimmer, worn with absence, but still held the faint scent of lavender lotion, her mother's favorite. Emily moved slowly, brushing her fingers across the desk's wooden surface, the books organized in neat rows, the framed photo of her and her mother from a summer trip years ago. She sat at the desk and inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay grounded. Sorting through Evelyn's belongings felt like trying to walk through fog. Every item reminded her of a conversation they would never have again. She opened drawers one by one, not expecting to find anything more meaningful than old receipts or pens that no longer worked. She paused when she found her mother's address book, flipping through the pages and stopping each time she recognized a name in an old friend, a neighbor from their childhood block, the doctor who had cared for Evelyn through her final months. Each name pulled at her heart until she had to close the book and steady her breathing. As she tugged at the last drawer, the one that always stuck a little, it resisted as usual. She pulled harder, jiggling it until it finally gave way with a jerk. Something thin and cream-colored slipped from underneath the drawer and fluttered to the floor. Emily froze. Slowly, she reached down and picked it up. It was an envelope, aged around the edges, sealed, with her name written across the front in her mother's familiar handwriting. Emily's breath hitched. She traced her fingers over the letters, feeling the shape of each stroke. Evelyn had always written her name with a soft curve on the E, something Emily used to tease her for. Now it felt like holding a piece of her mother's soul. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter, 2 pages folded neatly, and a small brass key taped to the back of one page. For a moment, Emily couldn't read. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the letter to her chest and inhaled shakily, as if she could pull her mother's strength from the ink. Finally, she unfolded the paper. Her mother's words greeted her like a voice she wasn't ready to let go of. "My dearest Emily, if you're rereading this, then my time has passed, and I hate that you're refacing the world without me. I never wanted you to need this letter, but life is unpredictable, and people don't always show you who they are until it hurts. I prepared something for you, something important." The key attached opens a safe deposit box at Bank of America, branch 14 on Riverside. Box 447. Inside you'll find documents you must read carefully. They will answer questions you don't even know to ask yet. Trust no one except the people listed in the folder. Protect yourself and your child. And remember, everything I did to make sure you'd never be powerless. I love you, Mom. Emily read the letter 3 times, each sentence hitting with a different force. She wasn't sure which emotion was stronger: grief from hearing her mother's love in those written words, fear from the cryptic warning, or confusion from the mention of documents that would change everything. Her mother had lived modestly her entire life. Emily had grown up in a small apartment, watched her mother stretch paychecks, and saw her clip coupons with pride. What documents could be so important that Evelyn hid them in a safe deposit box? What answers could she have been referring to? And what did she mean about people showing their true nature? The timing was too precise. There was no way her mother could have known about Ryan's betrayal. Yet the letter felt as though it had been written for this exact moment. Emily stared at the key taped to the page. It was small, simple, unremarkable, yet somehow felt heavier than the entire house pressing in on her. Her heartbeat quickened. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to crawl back into bed and let the world drift by. But another part, the part that had survived the funeral humiliation, the gossip, the abandonment, felt something spark to life, a pull, a calling, maybe even hope. Grabbing her keys, Emily drove across Austin with her mother's letter shaking in her hand. The city blurred past her as she replayed Evelyn's words, searching for hidden meaning. By the time she reached the Bank of America branch, she felt like she had stepped into a different reality, a place where her mother might have left behind more than memories. At the front desk, Emily introduced herself and presented the key. The banker, a middle-aged woman with a practiced smile, led her through a security check, then into a narrow hallway lined with small metal doors. When the woman left her alone with box 447, Emily sat at the table staring at the cold steel container. She felt like she was about to uncover a secret her mother had been waiting years to reveal. She inserted the key with trembling hands, turned it, and pulled the box out. What she found inside made her vision blur. There were folders neatly labeled, tightly packed, filled with financial records, property deeds, investment portfolios, and legal documents that didn't match the life her mother appeared to live. Emily opened the first folder and froze. The numbers were staggering. Properties in Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, Miami. Investments that had multiplied over decades. Stocks in companies she had only ever seen mentioned on financial news broadcasts. And at the top, a summary sheet listing the total value of the assets. $500 million. Emily felt the world tilt. She blinked, reread the line, blinked again. Her mother, her loving, frugal, clip-on-clipping mother, had secretly built a financial empire $500 million strong. Emily tore through the next folders, each one revealing more layers of a life her mother had deliberately hidden. Rental properties, business partnerships, trust structures, even instructions written in Evelyn's handwriting explaining how and why she invested in each asset. Every detail had been planned. Every asset protected, every document secured for Emily's future. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Her mother hadn't just left her money. She had left her weaponry, a shield, a path forward, and a warning. Emily felt her pulse race with a mixture of disbelief and awe. How much had her mother known? How long had she been preparing this? And why had she kept it all hidden? Questions swirled through her mind. But one truth cut through the chaos more clearly than all the rest. She wasn't powerless. Not anymore. Her mother had seen the world for what it was: brutal, unpredictable, filled with people capable of betrayal, and had built a fortress for her daughter long before Emily ever knew she would need it. Emily gathered every document, placed them carefully into the banker's provided case, and took a long breath. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something steady beneath her feet. She wasn't just a grieving daughter or a discarded wife. She was Evelyn Carter's daughter, the heir to a legacy constructed with brilliance, foresight, and love. And she would use it, not for revenge. Not yet, but for rebirth, for strength, for the future growing inside her. As she walked out of the bank and into the bright Texas sun, Emily felt the world shift. She wasn't alone. Her mother had left her more than memories. She had left her power, and Emily was finally ready to claim it. Emily sat in her car for several minutes after leaving the bank, gripping the steering wheel with both hands while the weight of everything she just discovered pressed down on her like a tidal wave. The city around her moved in steady, predictable rhythms, cars honking, people walking with purpose. The Texas sun pouring through her windshield, but inside her chest, chaos churned in ways she didn't know how to contain. She kept replaying the number written on the summary sheet: $500 million, not 5 million, not 50, $500 million. It was so far removed from the life she'd known that her brain struggled to wrap around it. Her mother, the woman who shopped clearance racks and made casseroles from leftover rotisserie chicken, had accumulated a fortune that could buy entire neighborhoods. The contrast felt impossible, almost surreal, like discovering her mother had lived a secret life as a superhero. Emily leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, fighting the urge to cry, not from grief this time, but from a bewildering mix of awe, gratitude, and confusion. Everything she thought she knew about Evelyn Carter had shifted, deepened, expanded into something she never expected. Her mother wasn't just kind, wise, and resilient. She had been strategic, powerful, and astonishingly intelligent. And she had kept it all hidden to protect her daughter. Once she finally steadied herself, Emily reached into the banker's case and pulled out the first thick folder, skimming through page after page that felt like glimpses into a world she had never imagined her mother inhabiting. There were property deeds for commercial buildings in Dallas, apartment complexes in Houston, a stretch of beachfront rental homes near Destin, and even a boutique hotel in Santa Fe that Evelyn had purchased under a holding company name Emily didn't recognize. Each deed was neatly dated, each investment signed by her mother with a confidence that suggested she'd known exactly what she was doing. Emily felt a shiver race through her, not of fear, but of incredulous admiration. Evelyn had built an empire while raising her alone, working a modest job, and never once letting on that she was quietly crafting a financial legacy that would change her daughter's life. Emily flipped to a folder labeled Investment Portfolio, and her breath caught when she saw early shares of several tech companies now worth hundreds of millions. Evelyn had invested in them decades ago, long before they became Silicon Valley giants. There were handwritten notes in the margins of some statements, small, thoughtful observations Evelyn had made about market patterns, leadership shifts, or technological trends. Emily felt her throat tighten. Her mother hadn't been lucky, she had been brilliant, quietly brilliant. She had watched opportunities, made calculated moves, and taken risks no one would have expected from a woman who appeared to live paycheck to paycheck. Emily couldn't help but laugh softly at the absurdity of it, not because it was funny, but because she knew her mother would have loved the irony that everyone around her never had a clue. As she turned more pages, she found documents detailing a trust structure that seemed impossibly complex. It was designed to protect Emily from every angle of marital claims, lawsuits, creditors, manipulation, even her own potential mistakes. Her mother had thought of scenarios Emily didn't even know existed. Evelyn had built layers of security that ensured not a single penny could ever fall into Ryan's hands or the hands of anyone connected to him. That truth alone made Emily's eyes burn. Evelyn must have known maybe not the exact betrayal, but the possibility that life could turn cruel in ways her daughter didn't anticipate. She hadn't left Emily money, she had left her armor, a fortress disguised as a filing system. Emily flipped to the last section and found personal notes addressed to her from various years, short messages Evelyn had written during moments when she'd updated the trust. Emily, if you were reading this one day, know that I always believed you deserved the world. Trust people slowly. If anyone betrays you, let this foundation be your strength. Emily pressed her hand over her heart, letting the love in those notes wash over her. She had spent the past week drowning in abandonment. Now she felt wrapped in the unwavering loyalty of the one person who had never forsaken her. The more Emily read, the more the shape of her mother's plan came into focus. Evelyn hadn't just been saving money. She had been constructing a legacy with purpose. Each investment wasn't random, it was part of a larger strategy. The rental properties created steady income. The commercial buildings offered long-term security. The tech shares had turned small bets into unimaginable returns. Private equity fund tucked inside another folder showed 8 investments in early-stage companies that had since expanded across the country. Some of the valuations made Emily's head spin. She flipped to the last page, where the portfolio's projected monthly income was listed. When she saw the figure over $3 million per month, she dropped the folder onto her lap, stunned. Her mother's empire wasn't just large, it was self-sustaining, growing, thriving. She muttered, almost to herself, "Mom, how did you do all this?" She found no answer, but she felt the truth in her bones. Evelyn had planned for Emily to inherit not just wealth but independence, power. The ability to stand alone when the world took everything from her. And suddenly, Emily understood something profound. Her mother hadn't been preparing for her death. She had been preparing Emily for life after betrayal. Preparing her for this exact moment. With trembling hands, Emily picked up a smaller envelope tucked at the bottom of the box. It was labeled "For when you feel lost." Inside was a single page. "You may not understand everything today," the note read, "but you will. When the world shows you its cruelty, remember that I gave you the means to rise above it. Do not let anyone break you. Do not let anyone convince you that you are small. You are my daughter. You are capable of more than you know." Emily covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. For days she had felt crushed by grief, betrayal, judgment, and loneliness. She had felt abandoned and powerless. But now, sitting with her mother's secret spread across the passenger seat, she felt something ignite inside her, a determination she didn't recognize yet, but one she knew would grow. She wiped her tears, sat up straighter, and took a slow breath. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't ruined. She wasn't broken. She had inherited a kingdom she never knew existed. And for the first time since Ryan had handed her those divorce papers at the worst moment of her life, Emily felt the early spark of a future that belonged entirely to her. Her mother hadn't left her money. She had left her fire. Emily started the engine and drove home with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. She was still grieving. She was still heartbroken. But she was no longer afraid. The Walkers thought they had buried her along with Evelyn. They thought she was done, defeated, erased. They had no idea what Evelyn Carter had built, and they would soon learn what Emily Carter was capable of. She wasn't just surviving, she was awakening. And the world, including Ryan and everyone who had abandoned her, would never see her the same way again. Driving home with the documents beside her felt like transporting something sacred, something dangerous, something far bigger than she had ever prepared herself for. Emily pulled into her driveway with a renewed sense of purpose pulsing beneath her grief. The kind of purpose that didn't roar but carried a gravity strong enough to pull her forward. She couldn't go through these documents alone, not when they involved so many legal structures, financial strategies, and trust protections that felt like deciphering another language. And her mother, always 3 steps ahead, had anticipated that. Near the back of the safe deposit box had been a small black folder with 3 business cards clipped together, one for Jonathan Pierce, a high-level estate attorney in Austin, one for Madison Lee, a financial strategist and fiduciary advisor, and one for Margaret Hale, a tax consultant. Under the cards, written in Evelyn's neat handwriting, was a single sentence: "These are the people you trust." Emily stared at that line for a long moment. After everything she had endured, the idea of having people she could trust felt almost foreign. But she owed it to her mother and to herself to follow the guidance Evelyn left behind. So with a deep breath, Emily dialed the number for Jonathan Pierce. His voice was calm and steady when he answered, a kind of professional confidence that immediately grounded her. "Emily," he said after she introduced herself, "your mother told me that one day you might call. I'm glad you did. Let's schedule a meeting, preferably today." The certainty in his tone eased something in her chest. It was the first time in weeks someone spoke to her with clarity instead of pity, with direction instead of hesitation. They agreed to meet at his office that afternoon. Before leaving, Emily grabbed the banker's case, double-checked that she had the letters and the key, then stood at the doorway for several seconds, gathering courage. She wasn't stepping into the world as the shattered woman Ryan left behind. She was stepping into the world as her mother's daughter, the heir to an empire built quietly, strategically, brilliantly, and she was determined to understand it, protect it, and wield it with the care it deserved. Jonathan Pierce's office sat in a modern high-rise overlooking downtown Austin. The type of building she would have once felt out of place entering. Today she walked through the polished glass doors with a new steadiness, even if her hands still trembled. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and soft golden light. A receptionist escorted her to a private conference room where Jonathan waited, a man in his early 60s with sharp eyes, kind features, and a presence that radiated both power and reassurance. He stood as she entered, offering a respectful nod. "Your mother was one of the most remarkable clients I've ever had," he said. "I'm honored to continue her work with you." Emily felt her throat tighten again, but she forced herself to smile. Then they sat, and for the first time since Evelyn's passing, Emily felt like she was beginning to understand the scope of what her mother had created. Jonathan opened the banker's case and began organizing the folders with practiced efficiency. "Before we discuss details," he said gently, "I want you to know something. Your mother spent decades building this structure with one goal in mind: your protection. Financially, legally, emotionally. She wanted to ensure you would never depend on anyone who didn't value you. And she made sure no one, including Ryan, could ever exploit what she built." Hearing someone else articulate what Emily had only begun to piece together sent a wave of emotion rushing through her. She nodded, biting the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. She didn't want to break, not here, not now. She needed to understand everything. Jonathan explained the trust structures, the inheritances, the ownership percentages, and the protective clauses Evelyn had built into every asset. Emily listened carefully, absorbing more information than she thought her brain could handle. The trust, called the Carter Strategic Legacy Fund, had been engineered to withstand every imaginable legal threat. A prenuptial agreement would have protected the assets during her marriage, but even without one, the trust was so airtight that Ryan had no path to access any part of it. "Your mother anticipated marriage complications," Jonathan said delicately. "Not necessarily the divorce itself, but she understood people can change. She wanted to safeguard you from any form of manipulation." Emily felt bitterness and gratitude twisting together in her chest. Her mother had seen something she had missed. Maybe not the specifics, but the possibility of betrayal, and she had prepared accordingly. After reviewing the legal protections, Jonathan pulled out a final document, one Emily hadn't seen yet. "This," he said, "is a directive your mother wrote to me 2 years ago." Emily took the document with trembling hands. It read, "If my daughter ever faces significant emotional, financial, or marital hardship, activate Phase 2 of her inheritance plan. Ensure she meets with Dr. Madison Lee. Emily must understand not just what she owns, but how to control it." Emily exhaled shakily as tears welled again. Her mother hadn't just protected her. She had planned for her to rise from whatever pain life inflicted, and now Emily was living the exact moment Evelyn had prepared her for. Jonathan placed a warm hand over hers. "Your mother believed in you. She believed you would not just survive hardship but transform because of it." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. She felt a strength stirring inside her that hadn't existed a week ago. a strength her mother had planted long before Emily knew she'd need it. After their meeting, Jonathan led her to a second office in the same building where Druter Madison Lee practiced. Lee was younger, mid-40s, with sharp intelligence in her eyes and the poised confidence of someone who had climbed her way to the top of the financial world without apology. She greeted Emily with a firm handshake and an expression that held both respect and determination. "Your mother trusted you, dear," Lee said as they sat, "which means I trust you. Our job now is to ensure no one can ever use your vulnerability against you, especially your ex-husband." Emily felt a subtle heat rise in her chest at the mention of Ryan, not anger, not yet, but resolve. The kind that formed quietly and grew steadily, like roots taking hold before a storm. Lee pulled up digital projections on a sleek touchscreen monitor. Graphs, charts, numbers, forecasts, everything Emily had seen in the folders, but organized with precision that finally made it comprehensible. The portfolio was not only vast, it was engineered for growth. Evelyn had turned small seeds into towering forests of wealth. "What your mother built," Lee said without exaggeration, "is extraordinary, and she built it for you, no one else." Emily felt her heart swell with something beyond grief or gratitude: pride. Pride in the woman who raised her. Pride in the legacy she now carried, pride in herself for being strong enough to face this moment. They spent hours reviewing each asset class, each income stream, each risk analysis. Emily asked questions, dozens of them, determined not to be overwhelmed. Determined to honor her mother's genius by understanding every piece of what she'd been given. By the end of the meeting, she felt drained but transformed. She wasn't the same woman who had gone to the funeral. She wasn't the same woman who had crumpled under Ryan's betrayal or watched neighbors turn away. She was someone new, someone rising, someone stepping into a world her mother had built stone by stone. And as she walked back to her car at dusk, the Texas sky painted in streaks of orange and red, Emily felt something powerful settle inside her. She wasn't alone, she wasn't broken, she wasn't afraid. She had allies now, people her mother had chosen. She had knowledge. She had security. She had $500 million of protection wrapped around her like armor forged from years of sacrifice. And most importantly, she had purpose. The Walkers had tried to destroy her. Ryan had tried to replace her. The community had tried to erase her. But Emily Carter was stepping out of the ashes with resources they could never imagine. And soon, they would learn that they had betrayed the wrong woman. Emily woke the next morning with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. The kind that didn't shout but settled into her bones with quiet authority. She wasn't suddenly healed, nor was she free of grief, but something inside her had shifted permanently. The woman who had returned from the bank carrying $500 million of her mother's brilliance could not stay hidden in the shadows of heartbreak. Her mother hadn't built an empire for her to cower. Evelyn had built it so her daughter could rise. And Emily finally understood that the best way to honor her mother, protect her unborn daughter, and reclaim her dignity was to step fully into the world her mother had prepared for her. Even if it meant walking into rooms she had once felt unworthy to enter. She started by calling Dr. Madison Lee again, not for financial guidance this time, but for something more personal: advice on how to begin presenting herself to the influential circles her mother had quietly operated within for years. Madison didn't hesitate. "You need visibility," she said. "You need to control your narrative. And you need to show the world, especially those who doubted you, exactly who you are." Emily felt her pulse steady as she listened. This wasn't vengeance, it wasn't a performance, it was reclamation. She had been pushed to the margins. Now she would step into the center. They began planning her reintroduction to society with precision. Madison pulled up lists of charity galas, fundraising dinners, philanthropic summits, and networking events across Austin, Dallas, and hosted events attended by CEOs, politicians, philanthropists, tech founders, and the kind of people who valued influence as much as wealth. Each event, Madison explained, was an opportunity for Emily to establish herself not as a victim, not as the abandoned wife of Ryan Walker, but as the heir to the Carter legacy fund, a woman with power, poise, and purpose. Emily's first public appearance came in the form of a charity dinner hosted by the Austin Women's Health Initiative, a cause her mother had quietly donated to for years. When the organizers learned that Emily wanted to attend, they insisted on featuring her as a special guest, noting Evelyn's long history of contributions. Emily almost declined. She wasn't used to attention, and the thought of walking into a ballroom buzzing with socialites and executives made her stomach twist. But she remembered Madison's words. She remembered the letter her mother had written, and she remembered the humiliation at the cemetery the moment Ryan ripped her life apart without hesitation. That memory didn't break her anymore. It propelled her, so she went. She wore a simple but elegant black dress. Madison helped her choose, nothing flashy or loud, but tailored, timeless. The kind of dress that made a statement without trying. Her hair was styled into soft waves, her makeup subtle enough to let her natural beauty shine. When she stepped into the ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel, heads turned not with judgment or gossip this time, but with curiosity. Whispers circulated instantly. Is that Emily Carter? Isn't she Evelyn's daughter? I heard she inherited everything. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something other than pain when people looked her way. She felt grounded, she felt present, and despite the anxiety swirling in her stomach, she felt like she belonged. When the event director approached to thank her for attending and offer condolences for her mother, Emily responded with grace, humility, and a confidence she didn't know she had. People noticed, they always noticed authenticity in a room filled with aides. Throughout the night, she met philanthropists, doctors, business owners, and advocates who remembered her mother with warmth and admiration. Many shared stories about Evelyn's generosity, donations she made anonymously, initiatives she supported behind the scenes, scholarships she funded without taking credit. Emily felt pride swell in her chest with every story, realizing how much her mother had shaped the community without ever revealing the true scale of her influence. Several women took Emily aside to tell her how Evelyn had quietly stepped in during their hardest times, paying medical bills, funding startups, assisting shelters. Emily listened with a mix of awe and heartbreak, realizing her mother had operated in a world Emily never fully saw. But now it was her turn to step into that world, not as Evelyn's shadow but as her legacy. When Emily made a substantial donation at the end of the night, her first public display of the wealth she now controlled, the room stirred with palpable respect. Not because of the money alone, but because of the grace with which she gave it. She didn't flaunt her wealth. She gave with sincerity, stating simply that she wanted to continue her mother's work. It was the perfect introduction. It showed compassion, poise, and purpose, three qualities the elite valued far more than arrogance. That night, as she left the hotel, a few photographers waiting outside captured her stepping into her car. By morning, those photos circulated through social media with captions like "Evelyn Carter's daughter continues her mother's legacy" and "Emily Carter returns with quiet power." For once, people weren't whispering about her tragedy, they were talking about her emergence. And it felt like reclaiming oxygen after drowning for too long. In the days that followed, invitations poured in, high-profile luncheons, fundraisers, art showcases, charity walks, business mixers, panels featuring women in leadership. Each organizer wanted Emily present not only because of her inheritance, but because she carried herself with an authenticity that drew people toward her. Emily attended each event with intention. She didn't overextend herself, didn't try to impress anyone, didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. Instead, she shared pieces of her mother's values, offering insights into causes she cared about: maternal health, community housing, education, and financial literacy programs for young women. Slowly, she built a reputation that wasn't tied to tragedy but to purpose. The more she engaged, the more confident she grew. Her voice no longer trembled when she spoke to donors or executives. Her posture straightened. Her presence sharpened. She started receiving requests to speak at events, speeches about resilience, grief, legacy, and empowerment. She accepted a few. Each time she stood behind a podium, she thought of her mother, imagining Evelyn watching with proud eyes. At one gala in Dallas, Emily delivered a speech that moved the room to tears. Afterward, a CEO from a major tech company approached her and said, "Your mother raised a remarkable woman." That compliment stayed with her for days. It was the first time she realized she wasn't just surviving, she was evolving, becoming the woman Evelyn always believed she could be. Meanwhile, her integration into elite philanthropy circles didn't go unnoticed by the Walkers or by Ryan. News traveled fast in their social spheres. Emily didn't flaunt her rises, she didn't need to. The world noticed for her. Friends who had once abandoned her now reached out with forced sweetness, hoping to reconnect. Emily responded politely but kept her distance. She no longer had room in her life for people who only valued her when she was broken. She was building something stronger now, something rooted in integrity, compassion, and quiet conviction. Of course, there were whispers. Some people wondered why she suddenly stepped into such visibility. Others speculated about the size of her inheritance, unaware of the truth but eager to guess. But these whispers didn't hurt her like the old ones had. These weren't whispers of pity, they were whispers of intrigue. And Emily was no longer a woman defined by the actions of her husband. She was a woman defined by her mother's foresight and her own strength. By the time she attended her fourth major event, a fundraiser for homeless families, she no longer felt like an outsider entering someone else's world. She felt like she belonged. Not because of the money, but because she was finally embracing the power her mother had given her. She stood taller, she spoke with more certainty, she laughed without apology. Every step she took into these elite circles felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been stolen, crushed, or ignored. She was rebuilding not in the shadows, but in front of the world. And if Ryan or the Walkers happened to see her transformation through social media or whispered rumors, that was merely a side effect. Emily wasn't doing this to impress them or to make them regret their betrayal. She was doing it for herself, for her daughter, for her mother. And every time she stepped into another gala, met another influential figure, or signed another check that helped someone in need, she became a force the world couldn't dismiss. The woman Ryan abandoned at the cemetery was gone. In her place stood someone extraordinary. Someone he would never again recognize because Emily Carter wasn't rising for him. She was rising for everything her mother believed she could be. And she was just getting started. The transformation of Emily Carter did not happen overnight, but within weeks of her first public reappearance. The whispers about her spread through Austin like wildfire, subtle at first, then persistent, then impossible to ignore. Society had watched her fall, observed her collapse at the cemetery, judged her through their narrow keyholes of gossip. But now they were watching something else entirely. They were watching a woman who had every reason to remain broken rise with a grace so unexpected it unsettled the very people who once pitied her. Her name began appearing in local news columns, lifestyle magazines, and philanthropic newsletters. The headlines weren't sensational or dramatic. They were admiring. Emily Carter continues her mother's legacy through major donation. The Carter Fund steps forward in support of women's health, a new face among Austin's philanthropic powerhouses. The media loved a redemption arc, but what made Emily's case magnetic was that she wasn't asking for redemption. She wasn't begging for sympathy. She wasn't even trying to convince the world of anything. She was simply existing in her new truth, calm, composed, and undeniably powerful, and that was enough to shift public perception. Conversations about her started at charity events, spilled into business circles, and eventually reached the social spaces where gossip thrived. People who once avoided her now spoke about her with fascination, calling her transformation classy, inspiring, and unexpected. She had become a topic of admiration rather than speculation. And when a local influencer posted a photo of Emily at a gala, her posture regal, her expression serene. Her hand resting gently on her pregnant belly, the caption read, "Strength looks like this." Within hours it went viral. Emily didn't post the image herself. She didn't need to. The world was watching her whether she wanted it or not. And for once, the attention didn't sting. It empowered her. Meanwhile, word of Emily's re-emergence drifted through the social circles occupied by the Walkers, rippling through their connections until it reached the one person least prepared to hear it, Ryan. The man who had handed her divorce papers at her mother's grave believed he had walked away from a woman who would disappear, someone who would crumble quietly and never recover. But the first time he saw her name trending on social media, he felt the ground shift beneath him. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. He was sitting at his desk, scrolling absent-mindedly through his phone, while Brianna fussed over her nails beside him. Then he saw the headline, "Here to the Carter legacy makes philanthropic debut." At first he thought it was a coincidence, someone with the same last name, maybe a distant relative. But then he clicked the photo. And there she was, Emily, his pregnant ex-wife, the woman he abandoned without hesitation. She didn't look devastated. She didn't look fragile. She didn't look like the woman he'd left standing in the cemetery as he walked away with Brianna. She looked radiant, strong, elevated. Her dress was elegant, her eyes clear, her posture steady. Her presence demanded attention without seeking it. She seemed untouchably composed, almost ethereal in a way that made Ryan's stomach twist with discomfort. He stared at the photo far longer than he intended, unable to reconcile the woman he had left with the woman before him. A knot formed in his throat, the kind that came from a feeling he didn't want to identify. Something between regret and disbelief. Something that throbbed with a sickening awareness he'd made a mistake. Brianna noticed the shift in his breathing before she saw the screen. "What are you looking at?" she asked, leaning closer. When she saw Emily's photo, her smile faltered for the first time in weeks. "Wow," she muttered, her voice tight. "She looks different." Ryan didn't respond. He couldn't. His thoughts were spinning too quickly. He remembered the Emily he left behind, crying, shaking, heartbroken. He had told himself she would stay that way, that she needed him, that he was too good for the mess their marriage had become. But now he was looking at a woman who had stood up from the ashes of betrayal and remade herself into someone unrecognizable. Someone more powerful than she had ever been with him. Brianna tried to regain control of the moment by rolling her eyes. "I mean, it's just one photo. Anyone can look good with the right lighting." But her voice betrayed her insecurity, and Ryan noticed. He had never paid much attention to the differences between her and Emily, not really. Brianna had been the escape, the excitement, the validation he craved when he felt neglected. But now, looking at Emily in that photo, poised and glowing with confidence, He had to confront a truth that made his skin crawl. He had traded a future for a fantasy, and the fantasy didn't feel quite so glamorous anymore. As the days passed, more photos appeared. Emily at a scholarship dinner, Emily speaking at a women's leadership event, Emily accompanying Dre, Madison Lee at a financial empowerment summit for young girls, Emily shining at a fundraising gala in Dallas, captured in a candid shot that circulated widely with thousands of likes. Every image chipped away at the story Ryan had told himself to justify his betrayal. Every mention of her name made Brianna's grip on him feel tighter, more anxious, more demanding, as if she sensed the shift too. And yet, despite the tension brewing in his own home, Ryan kept checking. It became a habit too strong to ignore. He told himself he was just curious, but the truth was far deeper, far more uncomfortable. Something in him was unraveling. Regret, jealousy, confusion, fear, they all tangled together, poisoning the certainty he once felt when he walked away. Meanwhile, the Walkers, his parents, felt the sting of Emily's rise even more sharply. Linda, who once smirked at Emily's humiliation, now found herself grinding her teeth whenever someone brought up Emily's name at brunch or business dinners. She's not doing anything special, Linda insisted whenever the topic came up. Just spending inheritance money. But even she couldn't ignore the fact that Emily wasn't merely spending. She was leading, influencing, building something meaningful. The narrative Linda had crafted about Emily being weak, unremarkable, or inadequate in their world was crumbling publicly, and she hated it. Emily was becoming the kind of woman Linda used to brag about wanting for her son, only now she wasn't theirs to claim. She was beyond their reach, beyond their control, beyond their judgment, and that fact burned deeper than they would ever admit. Back in her own home, Emily had no idea how deeply her transformation was affecting the people who discarded her. She didn't care. She wasn't rising for them. She wasn't dressing for them. She wasn't donating or networking or leading for them. She was doing it for herself, for her daughter, for the legacy her mother entrusted her with. She was no longer hiding from the world, from gossip, from heartbreak. She was building a world of her own. Every public appearance strengthened her sense of self. Every conversation with influential leaders sharpened her mind. Every donation reminded her of the woman who raised her. The whispers around town, admiring, respectful, impressed, replaced the old ones. And while she never sought validation, she welcomed the knowledge that she had rewritten the story people told about her. The woman who had been humiliated at a grave was now known for her strength, her grace, and her ability to rise from devastation with dignity. She didn't need revenge to feel powerful. She only needed to exist in her truth. But the Walkers didn't know that. Ryan didn't know that. They all thought her rise meant something about them. They thought it was aimed at them. They thought it was a response to them. And while Emily didn't waste a single thought on their feelings, fate had a strange way of making people confront what they tried to avoid. Because Emily's rise wasn't just changing her life, it was unraveling theirs. And soon, they would learn that the woman they underestimated had become someone they could no longer ignore. Someone they could no longer reach. Someone they could no longer diminish. Emily Carter had risen and the world was taking notice. But the consequences of that attention were only just beginning. Ryan had never considered himself a man who second-guessed his choices. He prided himself on decisiveness, on believing that once he walked away from something, it was because he had outgrown it, evolved past it, or deserved something better. That belief had always been easy to hold until Emily's name began appearing everywhere. What started as a single photo at a gala turned into a constant barrage of articles, posts, mentions, and conversations that forced their way into his daily life. Each time he opened his phone, Emily's face stared back at him, not tear-streaked, not broken, not fragile the way he remembered her at the cemetery, but glowing, powerful, composed, and surrounded by people he once thought were far beyond her reach. Ryan felt a pinching discomfort in his chest each time her name popped up, a feeling he refused to call regret. At least not out loud, but it grew. Every headline intensified it, every photo made it harder to ignore, and every event she attended reminded him that Emily had stepped into a world he had never bothered to explore, a world she now belonged to more than he ever could. He told himself he was just curious, but deep down, a truth he didn't want to face gnawed at him. Emily was becoming exactly the kind of woman he once bragged he deserved, only she wasn't his to claim anymore. The need to see for himself became unbearable the morning he stumbled across a video of her speaking at a charity summit. The clip was only 30 seconds long, but it shook him enough to force him to sit down. Emily stood at a podium, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, the other gesturing with calm certainty as she spoke about resilience, community, and the impact of her mother's work. Her voice was steady, her confidence undeniable, her presence magnetic. Ryan felt something crack inside him, a deep, bruising realization that he had never really known her. Not the version of her who now stood before the world with uncheckable purpose. He had seen her as soft, accommodating, dependable qualities he once found comforting and later found suffocating. He never imagined she could evolve into someone who commanded rooms with ease. Someone who didn't need him. Someone who had risen far beyond the life he offered. The more he watched, the more something dark and uneasy settled in his stomach. He paused the video halfway through and found himself whispering, how did she become this? The truth that she had always had this strength inside her, buried under loyalty and selflessness, made him feel smaller than he'd ever admit. For the first time, he wondered whether he had left her because he believed she was weak, or because he was afraid she might become strong. And that thought lingered like a stain he couldn't wash off. By the end of the day, he tried to rationalize the discomfort growing inside him. He told himself Emily was putting on a show, that the attention would fade, that the news cycle would move on. But deep down he knew it wasn't temporary. Emily wasn't faking this transformation. She was stepping into it with a conviction that had been missing during their marriage, a conviction she now offered to the world with unapologetic clarity. And for the first time since he left her, Ryan felt the suffocating edge of jealousy. Not because she was successful, but because she was thriving without him, in a way that made his own life feel painfully stagnant. Brianna sensed the shift long before he said a word. She saw the way he lingered over photos of Emily longer than necessary. She caught the way his jaw tensed when someone mentioned Emily's rising influence. She noticed the way his eyes drifted, the way his mood darkened at night, the way he grew distant when she tried to pull him close. Brianna tried to laugh it off with snide comments. Good lighting can make anyone look important, or everyone gets their 15 minutes, but her insecurities seeped through every word. She wasn't stupid. She saw the threat. She felt it. And she feared it. Because Brianna knew something Ryan wasn't ready to admit. Emily had become the woman he always wanted, while Brianna remained the woman he settled for. The tension between them grew like an invisible bruise neither could ignore. Arguments formed over nothing: dirty dishes, weekend plans, money, the temperature in the apartment. Each fight became a mirror reflecting how fragile their relationship truly was. And each time Emily's name surfaced, the crack widened. Brianna wanted reassurance. Ryan wanted escape. Neither got what they needed. It wasn't long before Ryan did something he swore he wouldn't do. He reached out. At first, it was subtle, an email with a subject line reading "checking in." The message was short, carefully worded, almost pathetic in its restraint. "I hope you're doing well. I know the last few weeks have been difficult. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." He hovered over the send button for a long time before finally pressing it. But hours passed, a day passed, 2 days, no response. Emily didn't even open the email. He checked obsessively, refreshing the screen until he grew angrier at the emptiness in her inbox. Then he tried texting her. "Emily, can we talk? Nothing. Have you been thinking about you?" "Nothing. I know things ended badly. I just want closure." Still nothing. The longer she ignored him, the more desperate he became. He tried calling 3 times in one afternoon, but each call went straight to voicemail. Emily had blocked his number. That reality hit him like a punch. Emily, the woman who once waited anxiously for his attention, no longer had space for him. She wasn't avoiding him temporarily. She had shut the door, permanently. And something inside Ryan, something he didn't know existed, twisted with humiliation. He wasn't used to being ignored. He wasn't used to being dismissed. He wasn't used to being irrelevant. But Emily made him feel all three with nothing more than her absence. And the irony was brutal. The woman he had considered disposable no longer considered him worth acknowledging. It only grew worse when he scrolled through social media and saw new photos of her attending a high-profile charity gala in Houston. She wasn't smiling for the cameras. She wasn't posing or flaunting anything. She was simply present with a confidence that radiated without effort. She stood beside influential leaders, investors, and philanthropists, her posture relaxed, her expression warm yet reserved. Every image portrayed her as someone stepping into a higher world, a world Ryan now felt painfully excluded from. He imagined what people might be saying behind closed doors. Poor Ryan. He left her right before she became all this. He must be regretting everything. He really miscalculated, and the worst part was that those whispers were true. He was regretting it. Not because he wanted her back out of love, but because her rise exposed the hollowness in his own life. He had traded a woman of strength, integrity, and resilience for someone who promised excitement but delivered chaos. He had walked away from someone real for someone temporary, and now he was drowning in the consequences of his choices while Emily soared. Ryan couldn't escape the growing terror that maybe he wasn't the hero of his own story. Maybe he was the lesson. Emily, on the other hand, hardly noticed his attempts to reach her. She didn't check the email. She didn't unblock the number. She didn't even pause to wonder what he might want. She had outgrown the version of herself that once sought validation from him. Her time, her heart, her energy, none of it belongs to him anymore. She was focused on her future, her daughter, her mother's legacy, and the world she was building piece by piece. Ryan's existence had become a distant echo, a noise she refused to entertain, and that, more than anything, was what truly crushed him. Not her success, not her fame, not her new connections, but the realization that he no longer mattered in her story. Emily had risen. Ryan had sunk. And for the first time, he faced the truth without escape. Leaving Emily Carter might have been the worst mistake of his life. And she would never give him the chance to undo it. The revelation came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Emily finally mustered the courage to sort through the last of her mother's locked belongings. She had avoided these boxes since the funeral, afraid of what emotions they might dredge up. But now that she understood the magnitude of what Evelyn had built and the depth of her foresight, she felt a responsibility to uncover every piece of her mother's intentions. So she sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by fading sunlight and stacks of labeled containers, each one sealed with her mother's meticulous handwriting. Keep, donate, personal, Emily later. It was the last box, the one marked specifically for her, that captured her attention. The lid fit snugly, as if Evelyn wanted to ensure no one else touched it. When Emily lifted it, the faint lavender scent she always associated with her mother drifted up, bittersweet and grounding. Inside were smaller envelopes organized into sections: financial, health letters, and one that made Emily's pulse sharpen. Ryan. Her breath caught. For a moment she didn't move. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the envelope, and a heaviness settled in her stomach, not fear exactly, but anticipation. A sense that whatever was inside would change her understanding of the past 2 years. After several steady breaths, she opened it. Inside were printed photographs, screenshots, bank transfer documents, and notes written in Evelyn's familiar handwriting. Emily's vision narrowed as she pulled out the first photo. Ryan, unmistakably, standing outside a hotel in San Antonio with Brianna. His hand rested on Brianna's waist, his mouth tilted in a smile he had once reserved for Emily. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was from more than a year ago, long before Emily suspected anything. Her heart clenched, but she forced herself to look closer. The next photo showed the two entering the hotel lobby, their fingers intertwined. Another showed them sitting in a restaurant, Ryan leaning in close, their faces inches apart. Each photo was dated. Each one painted a timeline that stretched far longer than the lies he'd told her. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth, not to stifle pain but to contain the fury simmering beneath her ribs. Her mother had known. Not because Emily told her, but because Evelyn had seen the signs while Emily was too trusting, too hopeful, too willing to believe in the promises Ryan whispered. She set the photos aside, steadying herself before reaching for the stack of printed text messages. These were screenshots, ones her mother must have gathered with the help of someone Emily didn't yet know. But the content was unmistakable. Brianna, she's still clueless. I'm telling you, it's only a matter of time. Ryan, she's been busy with her mom. It makes things easier. Brianna, we just need to move fast. Your mom says the timing has to look clean. Emily's chest tightened. His mom, Linda. She read the exchange again, slower this time, feeling a heat rise under her skin. Linda had been involved actively, strategically involved. She had encouraged their affair, maybe even coordinated it. Emily's vision blurred for a moment as the betrayal deepened, expanding beyond her husband and his mistress into an entire family that had worked against her. She kept reading. Ryan, I'll give her the papers next week. Mom says it's better before the baby comes. Brianna, good. Once she's out of the picture, things will fall into place. Emily felt a sharp pain in her stomach, not from pregnancy, but from the force of truth pressing into her with a violence she hadn't expected. She whispered, they planned it. Saying the words made them real in a way that gutted her. Every instinct she had ignored, the coldness in Linda's eyes, the distance Ryan created. The way Brianna inserted herself into his life had been part of a deliberate blueprint to erase her. And she had no idea her mother had found the evidence long before Emily was ready to confront it. But the documents grew darker. Financial records showed transactions between Linda Walker and Brianna, transfers labeled as consulting fees and support funds. But the pattern was obvious. They were payments disguised as legitimate business expenses. Evelyn had printed each one, highlighted dates, and attached notes. One read, these coincide with Ryan's trips. Another pattern suggests coercion or incentive. Emily stared at the highlighted numbers, her pulse quickening as she realized how deeply Linda had invested in removing her. She had paid Brianna, paid her to maintain the affair, to keep Ryan hooked, to ensure he left Emily before the baby was born. The disgust that coursed through Emily felt heavy, cold, and sharp. But she kept turning pages. Because beneath the shock, beneath the fury, beneath the ache of discovering that her marriage had been an orchestrated lie, Something else was beginning to form clarity, not the painful kind she had felt at the funeral. This clarity was precise, methodical, empowering. It was the clarity of truth, and truth had weight. The last document in the envelope wasn't financial or photographic. It was a handwritten note from her mother. Emily immediately recognized the curve of the E in her name. Emily, I know this is difficult, but you need to see everything. People reveal themselves in moments of convenience. Ryan's betrayal is not your burden to carry, it is his. Their motives are not your fault. Your worth has never depended on their choices. I've gathered everything so you'll never question your reality. Protect your heart. Protect your child. And remember, you were raised to stand stronger than anything that tries to break you. Emily closed her eyes as tears gathered not from sadness, but from the overwhelming love threaded through her mother's words. Evelyn hadn't just protected her financially. She had protected her emotionally. She had ensured Emily would never doubt whether she had imagined the betrayal, never blame herself for the lies others told. Her mother had given her proof so she could heal without questioning her own memory or worth. Emily pressed the note to her chest. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, for everything. When she opened her eyes again, something inside her had changed. The heartbreak she once felt for Ryan dissolved into something quieter, steadier, and far more powerful. She didn't want him back. She didn't want his apology. She didn't even want him to understand what he had lost. Because now she understood what she had gained: a truth unfiltered, a legacy fortified, a mother's foresight, and a clarity that sharpened her path forward like polished steel. She gathered the documents, organized them carefully, and placed them back into the envelope. This wasn't evidence for revenge, not yet. This was evidence for protection, for strategy, for future decisions she would make with a mind sharpened by betrayal but steadied by purpose. Emily rose from the floor, her posture straighter than it had been in weeks. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't afraid. She felt anchored by truth, strengthened by knowledge, and backed by the silent force of her mother's love. As she placed the envelope into her home safe, she understood something with absolute certainty: Ryan and the Walkers hadn't just underestimated her, they'd underestimated Evelyn. And that mistake was going to cost them far more than they ever imagined. Emily walked through the house with newfound clarity. She had the wealth, she had the legacy, she had the strength, and now she had the truth. For the first time since the funeral, she felt untouchable. And when the time came, she wouldn't need to expose them with rage or desperation. Truth exposed itself. She would simply let it do the work. The Walkers had set a trap. Her mother had left her the key to dismantle it. And Emily Carter was finally ready to use it. The weight of the evidence Emily found didn't break her. It sharpened her. Every photograph, every bank transfer, every text message her mother had meticulously collected felt like a piece of a blueprint, a map that pointed toward a truth she could finally see without distortion. But instead of rushing to confront Ryan or the Walkers, instead of letting anger consume her or pushing her into reckless action, Emily chose something far more powerful: restraint. She wasn't interested in screaming matches, accusations, or scenes that would feed gossip and diminish her dignity. Her mother had left her not only the means to protect herself but the wisdom to use it strategically. And Emily understood now that revenge, if it ever came, had to be executed with precision, the kind of precision her mother respected. So she made a decision, a quiet act of defiance that carried more weight than any confrontation ever could. She would wait. She would watch. She would rise. And when the moment came to reveal the truth or to act in a way that allowed the truth to reveal itself, it would be on her terms, not theirs. Over the following weeks, Emily slipped deeper into her new life, one built with intention rather than chaos. Her days were filled with meetings, events, planning sessions, and initiatives that aligned with her mother's philanthropic legacy. She worked closely with Madison Lee, absorbing everything she could about investment strategy, asset protection, and leadership within philanthropic circles. She began to see the world through a lens her mother must have used for decades, a lens built on assessing character, reading between the lines, and understanding timing. Timing was everything. The Walkers expected her to lash out, expected her to crumble or retaliate in desperation. They believed she was predictable. But Emily had changed, and they had no idea what she was becoming. Her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. She let them continue with their lives, let them assume they had won, let them bask in the illusion of control. Meanwhile, she built a presence that grew stronger with every event she attended, strong enough that whispers about her influence reached the same circles Ryan frequented. She didn't need to chase them. Her progress did the chasing for her, and soon word of a major charity gala began circulating. One of the largest philanthropic events in the state, the Texas Hearts Gala, an annual gathering attended by business moguls, celebrities, philanthropists, political figures, and every influential family within a 100-mile radius. including the Walkers. The gala had always been a major affair, but this year it held special significance. The board had chosen to honor Evelyn Carter posthumously for her decades of philanthropic contributions no one fully understood until Emily stepped into the spotlight her mother once avoided. When the event coordinators reached out to Emily to formally present her mother's legacy award and speak on stage, she felt something click internally. A shift, a spark, the moment she had been waiting for. Not because it was a venue for revenge, Emily refused to taint her mother's memory with pettiness, but because it offered the perfect environment for truth, dignity, and transformation to converge in a way that couldn't be ignored. A room filled with people who mattered. A room filled with names that carried weight. A room filled with whispers that shaped reputations. And a room where the Walkers would see her not as the woman they tried to erase, but as the one who rose beyond their reach. Emily didn't see it as a confrontation. She saw it as alignment, her mother's legacy, her own rebirth, and the unveiling of the strength they never believed she possessed. She accepted the invitation without hesitation. In the days leading up to the gala, Emily poured herself into preparing not for dramatic scenes or sharp confrontations, but for presence. She and Madison met with designers, stylists, and event coordinators, not for extravagance but for symbolism. Everything Emily chose carried meaning. Her dress, an elegant floor-length navy gown inspired by one her mother wore in an old photograph, projected heritage, not extravagance. Her jewelry, a simple diamond pendant Evelyn had left her, symbolized continuity. Her posture, her tone, her poise all represented a woman in full command of her identity. She rehearsed her speech dozens of times, shaping it into something that reflected her mother's strength, her own journey, and the resilience needed to rise from devastation. She never mentioned Ryan. She never mentioned betrayal. She didn't need to. The people who mattered already knew, and those who didn't would see the truth simply by looking at her. As the night approached, Emily felt no fear, only certainty. She wasn't stepping into the gala for validation. She was stepping in to honor the woman who had given her life and the legacy that would protect her daughter's future. In this room, she would show the world who she had become, not through anger, not through accusations, but through grace that exposed the cracks in others. The night of the Texas Hearts Gala arrived with warm evening air and a sky painted in deep purples and soft golds. The venue, a sprawling glass building towering above downtown Austin, glowed like a promise. Photographers lined the entrance. Guests in gowns and tailored suits stepped out of luxury cars, exchanging greetings and compliments as camera flashes danced around them. When Emily's car pulled up, she inhaled deeply and stepped out with a poise that made heads turn instantly. She didn't force confidence. She carried it naturally, each step measured and fluid. The navy gown shimmered under the lights. Her hair swept over one shoulder. Her hand rested gently on her baby bump, not as a weakness, but as a symbol of the life she was protecting. Cameras flashed. Guests murmured, people complimented her. But Emily walked forward with clarity, offering warm nods and soft smiles while the world absorbed her transformation. She wasn't here to impress them. She was here because she belonged. Across the carpet, the Walkers arrived moments later. Linda wore a bejeweled silver gown, Richard a classic tuxedo, and Ryan, stiff, uneasy, scanning the entrance, looked as though he were bracing for impact. And he was, because when his eyes found Emily, everything inside him shifted, his breath caught, his expression faltered. Brianna, by his side, felt his reaction instantly and tightened her grip on his arm in a way that made the discomfort spread further across his face. Emily didn't look away, she didn't avoid him. But she didn't acknowledge him either. She simply walked past as if he were nothing more than a stranger in a crowded room. That quiet dismissal hit him harder than any confrontation ever could, and Linda's expression, tight, jealous, and increasingly uneasy, told Emily everything she needed to know. Without speaking a word, Emily had unbalanced them. Throughout the evening, Emily became the person everyone wanted to talk to, not because of gossip, not because of curiosity, but because she radiated something magnetic and undeniable. She spoke to CEOs, philanthropists, senators, and charity directors with ease. She introduced new initiatives, discussed partnerships, and listened intently to proposals. Every conversation reaffirmed her place in this world, one she had earned long before she ever realized it. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, the Walkers observed her with growing discomfort. They watched as the most influential guests gravitated toward her. They watched her command the room with grace. They watched her embody everything they tried to strip from her. And the more they watched, the smaller they felt. It was exquisite symmetry. Their betrayal had tried to diminish her. Her rise diminished them. Emily didn't need to expose their scheming. Their reactions exposed themselves. When the time came for her speech, the ballroom dimmed and quieted. Emily stepped onto the stage, illuminated by soft golden lights. Her heartbeat was steady, her breath controlled. She didn't speak about grief, betrayal, or tragedy. She spoke about her mother, her strength, her foresight, her generosity, her love. She spoke about rebuilding resilience and rising from the hardest moments. She spoke about legacy, not just wealth, but character. Every word held weight. Every sentence shimmered with dignity. And when she finished, the room erupted into applause so strong it echoed through her bones. She glanced across the audience and saw Ryan staring at her with hollow eyes, the walker stiff with a mixture of shame and disbelief. Emily stepped down from the stage with a peace that felt anchored in truth. They could no longer deny who she had become, and she no longer carried who they made her feel like. The gala wasn't revenge, it was revelation. And the ones who betrayed her had just witnessed the moment she outgrew them entirely. Ryan had spent most of the evening spiraling. The more he watched Emily float effortlessly from conversation to conversation, surrounded by power brokers and philanthropists who treated her as an equal or worse, someone above them, the more his chest tightened with a mix of disbelief, envy, and a kind of fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. He kept glancing at her even when he didn't mean to, unable to tear his gaze away from the woman who had once looked at him with unwavering trust. Now she didn't look at him at all, not even once. It was as if he had been erased from the story, demoted from a main character to an irrelevant background figure. And that terrified him more than anything. Brianna sensed it instantly. She clung to his arm, tightened her grip whenever his eyes drifted toward Emily. Whispered snide commentary meant to convince him Emily's glow was superficial. But every attempt failed. The truth was too obvious. Emily didn't have to try to shine, she simply did. And the contrast between the woman he abandoned and the woman he saw now carved through him with irresistible force. By the time the dessert course was served, Ryan couldn't take it anymore. He excused himself from the table, barely acknowledging Brianna's annoyed protest, and began weaving through the crowd with a determination he hadn't felt since the day he proposed, though the intention now was painfully different. He had to talk to her, he had to see her up close. He had to force the universe to give him even a sliver of the validation he'd been craving since her rise began. Emily stood near one of the balcony entrances, speaking with a senator's wife about expanding initiatives for single mothers. She nodded thoughtfully, responded with composed empathy, and carried herself with a calmness that made everyone around her feel seen. Before the conversation ended, the senator's wife touched Emily's arm affectionately as if she had known her for years, as if Emily had always belonged in this world. That small gesture made Ryan's stomach drop. Emily hadn't just adapted, she had integrated, and she had done it without him. He waited until the senator's wife drifted away before approaching, his pulse pounding, his palms damp. He rehearsed a dozen openings in his mind, apologies, explanations, questions, but when he finally reached her, every carefully crafted phrase evaporated. Emily, he said, his voice cracking on the last syllable. She recognized his voice instantly, but the reaction he expected never came. She didn't tense, she didn't flinch, she didn't soften. She simply turned her head with measured composure, her expression unreadable, not cold, not warm, neutral in a way that unsettled him deeply. It was the neutrality reserved for a stranger. Ryan, she said in a soft, reserved tone that held neither affection nor resentment. It held nothing. That nothingness struck him harder than any insult could have. He swallowed. Can we talk? Emily studied him for a moment, not cruelly, not dismissively. Simply assessing him the way one might assess a bis proposition they had no intention of signing. This isn't the place, she said calmly. The words weren't harsh, but they created a wall he couldn't climb. Ryan took a step closer, lowering his voice. I need to explain. I know things happened badly. I know I hurt you. Emily didn't interrupt. She didn't rush him. But she didn't lean in or offer him emotional space either. She stood with the posture of someone who had learned to guard her peace with precision. He tried again. Can we just talk privately, please? Emily tilted her head slightly, like she was considering the request purely out of courtesy. There's nothing for us to discuss, she replied. Our lives moved in different directions, that's all. Ryan's throat tightened, that's all. Was she serious? His mind raced. The funeral. The divorce. Their marriage. Everything they had shared. Everything he thought she still remembered. Emily, he whispered urgently, I made mistakes, I know that. But I didn't expect. He paused, the words sticking. He didn't expect what? That she'd rise. That she'd thrive. That she'd outgrow him so completely. Emily watched him struggle but offered no rescue. For years, she had softened his shortcomings. Tonight, she let him face them alone. His voice cracked again. You re different now. Emily held his gaze steadily. No, she said, I'm not different. I'm just not who you tried to convince me I was. Her words landed with surgical precision, not angry, not accusing, just true, and that truth cut deeper than any weapon. Ryan stepped closer again, desperation rising. Please, just give me 10 minutes. I just need to say. Emily gently held up a hand. The gesture froze him. It was subtle but final. "Ryan," she said softly, "I wish you well, truly. But I don't owe you that conversation. Not anymore." He felt the floor drop beneath him. She wasn't saying it with bitterness or gloating or vindication. She said it with peace. That peace hit him harder than hate ever would. She didn't need closure. She had already closed the door. And he was still standing on the other side, knocking on wood that would never open to him again. Before he could respond, the chairman of the Texas Hearts Foundation approached, addressing Emily warmly and inviting her to join a group of donors waiting to meet her. She smiled politely and nodded. Then she offered Ryan a small, respectful nod, the kind one gives to a passerby, not a former husband, and walked away. She didn't look back, not once. Watching her leave felt like something inside him tearing open. The realization settled brutally. Emily wasn't acting indifferent. She was indifferent. He wasn't a villain in her story. He wasn't even an antagonist. He was irrelevant, and that truth crawled under his skin like ice. Brianna, who had witnessed the entire exchange from afar, approached with a forced laugh meant to hide her panic. "She brushed you off, huh?" she said, her tone sharp with insecurity. Ryan didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes remained fixed on Emily as she walked toward the influential donors who welcomed her like a rising star. He suddenly felt small. Smaller than he had ever felt. The woman he left behind had become untouchable. And the more she rose, the further he fell. He realized with a devastating clarity that Emily wasn't his past. She was everything he lost, and that loss was entirely his own doing. Inside the ballroom, Emily returned seamlessly to her conversations, her warmth effortless, her composure unshaken. The brief encounter with Ryan didn't linger in her mind. She had already mourned him. She had already released him. Tonight only confirmed what she already knew. She didn't owe him anything, not forgiveness, not closure, not conversation. She had stepped into a new life he had no place in. And as flashbulbs lit the room and guests leaned toward her with admiration, she felt her mother's presence like a steadying hand on her shoulder. She had honored her mother. She had honored herself. And no matter how desperately Ryan tried to cling to the remnants of the past, Emily Carter had already moved far beyond his reach. Emily's labor began on a cool Texas morning, just before the sun crested over the horizon and cast soft amber light across the city. She had felt the contractions building for hours, steady, purposeful, almost rhythmic, as though her daughter was choosing her own moment to arrive with the same quiet determination Emily herself had been living with for months. Madison drove her to the hospital, keeping one hand on Emily's shoulder as the nurses rushed her into a private delivery suite. There was no panic in the room, only focused energy and warm voices encouraging her to breathe through each wave of pain. Emily gripped the edge of the bed, jaw clenched, sweat dampening her hairline, but behind the intensity pulsing through her body, she felt something powerful, a deep, anchoring certainty. She wasn't afraid, she wasn't uncertain, she wasn't alone. She was bringing into the world the one person who had been with her through every moment of heartbreak, growth, and transformation. Her daughter, her future, her fresh beginning. The hours were long, but Emily fought through them with the same strength her mother always believed she carried. Nurses commented on her determination, her calm, the raw resilience she demonstrated with every contraction. Madison stood near the head of the bed, squeezing her hand between pushes, whispering encouragements that grounded Emily whenever the pain threatened to overwhelm her. And in the fleeting seconds between contractions, Emily felt her mother's presence so vividly it took her breath away, not in a mystical sense, but in the way memory can wrap itself around someone like a warm shawl. She could almost hear Evelyn's voice telling her she was strong, that she was ready, that this baby was the beginning of everything she had been preparing for. The thought fueled her, pushing her past exhaustion. And when the final push came, when the room erupted in movement and the doctor said, "One more, she's right there," Emily gathered every piece of strength left inside her and gave it everything she had. Moments later, the sound of her daughter's first cry filled the room, sharp and breathtaking. Emily's chest heaved as tears slid down her cheeks, not from pain, but from overwhelming relief and joy. They placed the baby in her arms, warm and small and impossibly perfect. Emily felt the world narrow to a single point of life resting against her chest, a new heartbeat, a new story, a new beginning. She looked down at the tiny face pressed against her skin, the soft wisps of dark hair, the delicate fists curling near her collarbone. The nurses asked gently if she had chosen a name. Emily nodded slowly, her voice thick with emotion. "Margaret," she whispered. "Her name is Margaret Evelyn Carter." The baby stirred as if acknowledging the words, her tiny body settling into Emily's arms with instinctive trust. Naming her daughter after her mother wasn't just sentimental, it was a continuation of a legacy built from courage, sacrifice, and love. A way to ensure Evelyn lived on through the next generation, a way to anchor Margaret to something deeper than wealth or inheritance. a way to pass her mother's strength into the future. As Emily held her daughter, she felt a warmth bloom in her chest, an emotion too large to define, too powerful to contain. Love, yes. Protection, absolutely. But more than anything, she felt purpose. She had risen for herself these past months, but now she would rise for Margaret too. Nothing and no one would ever hurt this child. Emily made that promise the moment she felt Margaret's breath against her collarbone. The following days in the hospital felt like a soft blur of tenderness and healing. Nurses came and went with gentle smiles. Madison brought flowers and soft blankets and sat for hours beside Emily, marveling at the baby's tiny features. Every person who entered the room commented on Margaret's calm demeanor, on how easily she seemed to adapt to the world around her. Emily spent long stretches just staring at her daughter, memorizing every detail, every small movement. At night, when the hallway lights dimmed and the world grew quiet, Emily cradled Margaret and whispered stories about Evelyn, about how she laughed, how she worked, how she fought for what mattered. She wanted Margaret to know her grandmother in spirit, even if they would never meet in life. She wanted her daughter to grow with an understanding of the powerful lineage she came from. And each time she whispered these stories, Margaret would settle against her as though she somehow sensed the legacy being woven around her. Emily found comfort in those moments, a softness that contrasted the months of hardness she had endured. She no longer felt hollow. She no longer felt abandoned. She felt filled in ways she couldn't have imagined. Motherhood didn't erase her scars, but it gave them new meaning. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building a life. She was nurturing a future. She was protecting something more precious than any fortune her mother had left behind. As news of Margaret's birth spread, messages poured in from Gallo acquaintances, philanthropic leaders, and media outlets who had followed Emily's story since her rise in the social sphere. Congratulatory articles appeared praising her strength as a new single mother and honoring her continuation of Evelyn's legacy. Emily appreciated the kindness but didn't let the attention distract her from what mattered most. She spent every hour with Margaret, absorbing her warmth and letting it heal the parts of her heart that still ached. Meanwhile, the Walkers learned of the birth through whispered channels, not through Emily. That truth stung them far more than they expected. Linda attempted to reach out through Jonathan, the lawyer, requesting updates on the baby. Emily declined. She didn't need their presence. She didn't want their influence. They had forfeited any claim to her daughter the moment they conspired to break her. And Ryan, who found out through social media, felt a kind of pain he wasn't prepared for. Seeing a photo of the tiny newborn wrapped in a soft blanket with Emily gazing down at her with serene affection sparked something deep and aching. A hollow, twisting realization that he had abandoned not just a wife but a family, a future, a child he would never meet. It left him breathless, crushed under the weight of his own decisions. But Emily didn't think about him. Not when she held Margaret close. Not when she kissed the top of her daughter's head. Not when she hummed to her during late-night feedings. Emily's world had shifted, narrowed, and clarified. Ryan was no longer part of any version of her life. The Walkers were relics of a past she no longer needed to confront. Her focal point was the tiny life in her arms and the massive legacy she now carried into the future. And as she fed Margaret one quiet afternoon, her thoughts drifted to her mother. She wished Evelyn could see this moment, could meet the granddaughter who already carried her name like a crown. But Emily also knew deep down that her mother had prepared her for this, had shaped her for this, had left her the strength to stand tall in this moment and every moment that would come after. 3 days later, Emily brought Margaret home. She stepped into her house with a sense of renewal woven into every breath. The home no longer felt haunted by loss. Instead, it felt alive again, filled with warmth and possibility. She walked through each room slowly, introducing Margaret to the space that would become her first world. In the study, Evelyn's old room, Emily paused the longest. She sank into the armchair with Margaret nestled against her chest and let the soft afternoon light fall over them. She felt her future unfurling, delicate but strong, like the beginning of a story that was entirely hers to write. Emily closed her eyes and whispered, "Welcome home, Margaret. We were going to build something beautiful together." She didn't need to plan every step ahead. She didn't need to prepare for every confrontation or every challenge. She would move with intention, with wisdom, with the quiet power her mother had gifted her. And Margaret, named after Evelyn's mother and carrying the spirit of both generations, would grow up knowing she inherited not only wealth, but resilience. Grace, strength. Emily opened her eyes, looked down at her daughter, and felt the truth settle deep and steady. This was the beginning of a new era. Not just for her family but for herself. After months of heartbreak, upheaval, and transformation, Emily finally understood. Her story didn't end with betrayal. It began with birth. And Margaret Evelyn Carter was the living proof of the legacy she would carry forward with unwavering resolve. In the weeks following Margaret's arrival, Emily's world reshaped itself with a clarity and purpose so profound that even she marveled at how far she had come from the woman left shattered at her mother's funeral. Her days were a gentle blend of new motherhood and strategic rebuilding, each moment reinforcing the life she now chose, intentionally steadier, brighter, anchored by her daughter's breath and her mother's legacy. She hadn't expected that holding Margaret would shift the way she viewed everything, but it did. Pain no longer felt like a weight dragging her backward, it felt like a lesson she had already outgrown. Betrayal no longer stung. It felt like distance. And Ryan's memory hovered somewhere so far behind her that it barely touched her consciousness anymore. Instead, she found herself enveloped in a peace she'd never known. One built from the quiet triumph of survival and the newfound conviction of purpose. As Margaret slept in her arms, Emily often found herself staring out the window, the Texas sky stretching endlessly before her. A reminder that no horizon was too distant for a woman who had already learned to rebuild from nothing. Meanwhile, the world outside her home continued to talk about her. The gala speech had gone viral across philanthropy circles. Videos of her acceptance speech, her graceful composure, and her poised conversations circulated widely, earning her invitations to speak at conferences, serve on nonprofit boards, and lead new collaborative projects rooted in Evelyn's legacy. Emily accepted only what felt meaningful, never chasing attention, only impact. People admired her for that restraint. They admired her even more when photos of her holding Margaret surfaced, released by the Charity Foundation with her consent. The image of Emily cradling her newborn daughter, soft natural lighting, a tender smile on her lips. Strength in her posture spread across social platforms with thousands of comments praising her resilience. She became not just a figure of influence, but a symbol of rebirth. And while some people credited her wealth for the transformation, those who truly paid attention recognized it wasn't money that elevated her, it was her character. Wealth opened doors, her integrity kept them open. For Ryan, however, that photo was the breaking point. Seeing Emily hold their child, his child broke whatever fragile illusion he had been clinging to. He stared at the image for hours, feeling a hollowness that threatened to swallow him whole. He tried to show Brianna, as if sharing the weight might ease it, but she only rolled her eyes, muttered something bitter, and stormed out of the room. He knew then, with painful clarity, that the life he had chosen was collapsing under the weight of its own shallowness. His relationship with Brianna had soared quickly after the gala. What once felt thrilling now felt suffocating. Her neediness grated on his nerves, her jealousy drained him, and her inability to handle Emily's rise made every day feel like a battlefield. Meanwhile, the affair she had once proudly flaunted no longer felt victorious, it felt foolish. Especially when the truth of her supposed pregnancy finally cracked. The moment Ryan discovered Brianna had never actually been pregnant, the moment he saw proof that she'd faked symptoms, staged doctor visits, and manipulated him and his family, his world imploded. He confronted her in a rage. She screamed back, accusations flew, but Emily didn't hear any of it. She didn't need to. Their chaos had become nothing more than distant noise. Ryan packed his bags eventually, ending the tangled mess he'd helped create. But it was too late. Too much damage had been done to his marriage, to his reputation, to his sense of self. And now, stripped of the illusion that he had upgraded, he was forced to face a life that felt unbearably small compared to the one he had thrown away. Linda and Richard fared no better. For years they had prided themselves on control over their son, their reputation, their social standing. But watching Emily rise, watching the daughter-in-law they once dismissed become a central figure in the philanthropic world, watching her grace outshine the bitterness they clung to, it dismantled them piece by piece. Invitations they once received effortlessly grew scarce. People whispered about their mistreatment of Emily. Some distanced themselves entirely, unwilling to be associated with such cruelty. And when Linda tried to reach out to Emily under the guise of wanting to see her grandchild, Emily simply forwarded the request to Jonathan with a clear, legal boundary: no contact. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. Emily would never let the Walkers near Margaret, not after understanding the extent of their manipulation. The Walkers had forfeited that right long before Margaret was born, and the cold realization that their lineage ended with them as far as Emily was concerned sent Linda into a downward spiral of her own making. They had lost their son's wife. They would never know their granddaughter. And the woman they once viewed as beneath them had become someone they now watched from afar with envy, resentment, and a long list of regrets they could never undo. Emily, however, didn't spend a single moment thinking about their regret. Her mind was focused on Margaret, on building a future infused with stability, love, and purpose. She established the Carter Women's Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers, domestic abuse survivors, and women rebuilding their lives after deep betrayal, the kind of program she wished she'd had access to in her darkest moments. She expanded her mother's investments, implemented new charitable efforts, and forged alliances with powerful women across the state. Her calendar filled quickly, her home filled with joy. Her life, once cracked open by devastation, now flourished with intention. And Margaret grew bright-eyed, calm, serene, absorbing the world around her with the gentle curiosity of a child who sensed she was deeply safe. Emily often held her daughter close while reviewing documents or preparing speeches, whispering, "You'll know strength before you ever know fear." And she meant it. Every day she built a life where Margaret would inherit not only wealth but wisdom, not only legacy but freedom. She would grow up knowing her mother had been broken once but rebuilt herself stronger than anyone expected. One late afternoon, months after the gala, Emily stood on her balcony with Margaret nestled against her chest, the Austin skyline glowing under a golden sunset. A warm breeze brushed through her hair as she swayed gently, humming to her daughter. Her gaze stretched across the city, the same city that had witnessed her darkest collapse and her quiet rebirth. She could almost feel her mother beside her, proud, steady, present in every whisper of wind. Emily closed her eyes and breathed deeply, absorbing the beauty of the moment. She wasn't chasing revenge. She wasn't chasing validation. She wasn't looking back. Her past had lost all power over her. Ryan and his family were no longer villains, just distant figures fading in her rearview mirror. What mattered stood right there in her arms. Her daughter, her legacy, her new beginning. Emily opened her eyes and whispered into Margaret's hair, "We're just getting started." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with bold streaks of crimson and gold, Emily Carter stepped fully into the life she was destined for: powerful, peaceful, unstoppable. The world ahead was hers, and she would walk into it with the strength of every woman who had ever loved her. The story of Emily Carter carries lessons that run far deeper than betrayal, wealth, or revenge. It is, at its core, a testament to the strength that emerges when a person is pushed past their breaking point. One of the most powerful lessons is that no amount of devastation, not heartbreak, not abandonment, not the cruelty of others, can define someone who chooses to rise. Emily began her journey believing her life had collapsed beyond repair, standing in the middle of a cemetery holding divorce papers while heavily pregnant. In that moment, she felt stripped of identity, worth, and hope. But the truth the story reveals is that life often rebuilds us precisely when we feel ruined. Emily didn't find her strength because she suddenly became fearless. She found it because circumstances forced her to confront who she truly was beneath the layers of dependency and grief. Her transformation teaches us that resilience is not a trait you reborn with, it's something that awakens inside you when survival, dignity, or the future of someone you love depends on it. Another lesson woven through the story is about the power of clarity that comes from truth, from understanding your value, and from shedding the illusions others impose on you. Emily spent years believing Ryan's love was her foundation, that his approval defined her worth, and that their marriage was solid even when cracks had begun to show. The evidence her mother left behind didn't just reveal betrayal. It revealed the depth of manipulation she had unconsciously endured, the way she had been conditioned to shrink herself to fit a life that wasn't aligned with her growth. Once she understood the truth, she didn't collapse into bitterness, she evolved. She stepped into the person she was always capable of becoming. The lesson here is that clarity is one of life's most potent forms of liberation. When you finally see people for who they are, you stop apologizing for walking away from them. And when you finally see yourself clearly, you stop apologizing for becoming someone stronger. The story also reminds us that revenge doesn't always need fire, confrontation, or destruction. Sometimes the most profound form of justice is a life well lived, a life that rises above the harm others intended. Emily never sought to humiliate Ryan or expose the Walkers publicly. She didn't weaponize her wealth or her new status. She didn't chase opportunities to get even. Instead, she chose grace, purpose, and forward motion. And that decision carried more power than any direct retaliation ever could. Watching Emily rise forced the people who wronged her to face themselves. Ryan's regret, Linda's unraveling, Brianna's insecurity, none of it was caused by Emily's actions. It was caused by the contrast between who they chose to become and who Emily allowed herself to be. The lesson here is clear: you don't need to destroy someone to show them what they lost. You only need to grow into the version of yourself they never believed you could be. A deeper, more intimate lesson comes from Emily's relationship with her mother's legacy. Evelyn Carter didn't just leave her daughter wealth, she left her foresight, structure, protection, and a blueprint for self-preservation. Emily's journey shows us that the love from those who truly care lives on in ways we don't always recognize at first. It teaches us that sometimes the strongest safety nets are woven long before we realize we'll need them. Evelyn's careful planning, her wisdom, and her belief in Emily became the foundation upon which Emily rebuilt her life. The lesson extends far beyond inheritance. It's about recognizing the value of roots, the influence of those who guided us, and the strength we carry because someone once believed we deserved better. Emily's rise wasn't just her own, it was a continuation of every sacrifice her mother made for her. And for readers, it's a reminder that our loved ones can continue to guide us even when they're no longer physically present. Legacy isn't money, it's the strength we inherit from those who raised us. Perhaps the most meaningful lesson in the story is what Emily discovers through motherhood. The moment she holds Margaret, everything that once seemed impossible becomes manageable. Her daughter becomes her anchor, her reminder of purpose, and her reassurance that the future can be brighter than the past. Instead of letting her trauma define Margaret's life, Emily builds a world where her daughter will know love before fear, stability before chaos, and strength before doubt. Her motherhood becomes an act of reclamation, a promise that the patterns of her past will not be repeated in the next generation. This teaches us that healing is not always for ourselves alone. Sometimes we heal because someone innocent depends on us. Sometimes we rise because falling is no longer an option. And sometimes the future we build becomes the clearest evidence that the past has lost its power. Finally, Emily's story teaches us that closure doesn't come from someone else apologizing or acknowledging the harm they caused. Closure comes from understanding that you have nothing left to reclaim from the people who broke you. Emily didn't need Ryan to validate her pain or explain his betrayal. She didn't need the Walkers to confess what they did. She didn't need revenge to feel whole. She found closure by outgrowing them, by stepping into a life that didn't include them, by realizing that the version of herself who once needed their approval was gone. Real closure is not a conversation, it's a transformation. And Emily reached that transformation through loss, through truth, through her daughter, and through embracing the life her mother always knew she deserved. In the end, Emily's journey is a reminder that every ending carries within it the seed of a beginning. She lost everything in a single devastating moment, only to discover that what she gained afterward was far more powerful. Her story teaches us that strength grows quietly, that dignity is worth protecting, and that the best chapters of life often begin after the worst heartbreaks. The true lesson is simple, as sometimes life breaks you not to destroy you, but to rebuild you into someone you were always meant to become. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of my latest videos. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like me to cover, leave a comment below. I always read all your comments.